how do you really make sense of the world? I mean, is it about seeing this big interconnected picture maybe where everything reflects something else?
Or is it more about digging down, measuring things precisely, getting the cold, hard facts?
Exactly. And today, we're doing a deep dive into, well, a huge historical shift
Hmm.
in exactly that, how people knew things. We're tracing the move from a really ancient sort of holistic view of nature towards, well, the rise of modern science as we know it.
Hmm. And our guide for this dive comes from a really interesting source. Part 4, The Dragons Challenge Science and Its Shadow. What's unique here is the perspective. It's almost like we're hearing from some ancient, wise observer looking back at humanity's journey.
Yeah, it gives it this fascinating feel. So our mission today is to unpack this huge turning point. What did we gain? And maybe what got kind of left behind or changed forever in this big shift. Okay, let's get into it.
Sounds good.
So let's start way back. For centuries, people lived in a world where, as the source puts it, they kind of reveled
Yeah.
in the grand design of the macrocosm's mirror. What does that really mean in practice?
Well, it means the world was seen as full of signs, of meanings. This was the time heavily influenced by what's called the doctrine of signatures.
Right, the doctrine of signatures.
Yeah, and our source describes it as this intricate system. It wasn't just abstract. It gave people meaning, comfort, even practical help, especially with health. It was seen as this beautiful tapestry woven from intuition, observation, and a profound belief in divine purpose.
So like finding connections.
Exactly. It was all about tracing the threads of sympathy, learning nature's lexicon of signatures. So you might look at a plant or a rock and its shape or color or where it grew. That was thought to be a clue, a signature.
Ah, like the classic example of the walnut looking like a brain, so it must be good for the brain.
Precisely. Or maybe a plant with red sap being used for blood issues. It comes from ideas like the world soul and celestial sympathies, this belief that everything was connected spiritually and physically.
And the way they talked about it, the language itself is different, wasn't it? Our source calls it poetic and resonant.
It really was. It implies this vibrant, living cosmos that was speaking directly through its forms. There was this sense of intimacy, I think, a feeling that nature wasn't just stuff, it was meaningful.
Okay, so you have this rich, symbolic worldview, but then something starts to shift. Here's where it gets really interesting, right? A new force emerges.
Yes, exactly. The source calls it science, with a capital S perhaps, to distinguish it, a new and formidable force.
And this wasn't just like more the old natural philosophy.
No, it was different in character, described as a rigorous and ultimately relentless form of inquiry. The driving force became dissection, measurement, and cold, hard facts.
Okay, so a very different approach. What did this new science demand from people?
It demanded proof you could verify, quantifiable results, and crucially, a deep skepticism towards anything that could not be seen, touched, or weighed. If you couldn't measure it, it was suspect.
And that beautiful sort of poetic language of signatures.
Mhm.
What happened to that?
Well, according to this perspective, it began to fade. It was replaced by a new, more precise, but also a far colder tongue. That's a really evocative phrase from the source. It captures that feeling of loss alongside the gain in precision.
A colder tongue, yeah. But this new approach, it must have had incredible power, right? That's why it took hold.
Oh, absolutely. Its power, its most potent weapon, as the source puts it, was its sheer ability to predict, to control, to explain natural phenomena with unprecedented accuracy. It worked in a very tangible way, let you manipulate the world.
So predictability and control became the new currency of knowledge.
In many ways, yes. And as science gained momentum, it inevitably started to carve up the seamless web of creation into manageable, measurable parts.
And those older ideas, the world soul, celestial sympathies.
They started to look, well, quaint. The world soul became a quaint notion. Celestial sympathies were dismissed as superstition, and those intricate signatures, believed to be divinely
It's
impressed,
just coincidences.
reduced to mere coincidences,
Yeah.
yeah, figments of an imagination that wasn't rigorous enough, scientifically speaking.
This wasn't like flipping a switch, right? It wasn't an overnight revolution.
No, no, not at all. The source emphasizes it was a gradual, inexorable shift, like watching a mountain range slowly erode over millennia. The doctrine of signatures wasn't necessarily attacked with malice, it was just undermined by a new, powerful, and ultimately more effective way of acquiring knowledge.
More effective, at least in terms of prediction and control.
Exactly. The new era had different demands. It wanted empirical evidence, reproducible experiments, and universal laws that worked everywhere, regardless of symbolic meaning.
But this progress, this evolution, it cast a shadow.
That's how the source frames it, yes. A long shadow. Because that vibrant, living cosmos, the one that seemed to speak through its forms, it was slowly transformed into a mechanistic universe.
Silent and indifferent.
Silent and different, yeah. Its secrets weren't offered freely through signs anymore. They had to be yielded, sometimes forcefully, to the dissecting knife and the measuring rod. The focus shifted entirely to what could be proven, measured, quantified.
Which brings us to this really powerful image from the source material. It talks about how a sharp blade, like science, can dissect a bird, show you its insides.
Right, you can see the organs, the mechanics.
But it can't show you the song it sang or the sheer joy of its flight. And the insight is, knowledge, little ones, has many forms and each has its limits.
That hits hard, doesn't it? It really highlights the trade-offs involved in seeking absolute clarity. You gain one kind of understanding, but you might obscure another.
Definitely. It makes me think, and maybe you listening can think about this too, take a concept, something complex, maybe beautiful, but hard to just pin down scientifically.
Like,
Like love, or maybe creativity, or just that feeling of pure awe when you see, I don't know, the Grand Canyon or a starry night, things that are deeply real experiences.
okay, so things that resist easy measurement.
Exactly. Now, how would you even try to reduce that purely scientifically?
Well, you could try, right? You could say love is just, neurochemicals firing. Oxytocin, dopamine, that sort of thing.
Or beauty is just about symmetrical patterns hitting our visual cortex in a pleasing way.
Or creativity is nothing but certain neural pathways lighting up.
Right. You can do that analysis. It's like analyzing a painting by its chemical pigments, maybe. You learn something.
But the crucial question then becomes, what understanding do you gain from that reduction? And maybe more importantly,
What gets lost?
exactly, what about the richness, the subjective feeling, the actual experience of love or awe or the creative spark? Does the scientific explanation capture that? Or does it diminish it somehow?
Thinking about that really helps understand what might have been pushed aside, what was potentially lost, when that older, more poetic, holistic understanding gave way to a purely empirical, sometimes reductionist, scientific view.
It's not saying science is bad, not at all. The source calls it necessary, even magnificent.
Yeah, an incredible evolution of our intellect.
But acknowledging that it came with this long shadow, that shift from seeing a living cosmos to seeing perhaps a mechanistic universe, well, it changed our relationship with the world profoundly, maybe making it quieter where it once seemed to speak.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, tracing this huge shift in how we understand reality. From a world speaking in signatures to one explained by science.
A truly fundamental change in perspective.
And it leaves us, and hopefully you listening, with a big thought to chew on. How do you, in your own life, find the balance? How do you appreciate the clarity, the power, the control that scientific understanding gives us?
Which is immense.
Immense, yeah. But how do you balance that with the richness, the meaning, the subjective experiences, the things that maybe don't fit neatly into quantifiable boxes?
It's a constant negotiation, isn't it, in how we see the world, how we live our lives.
It really is. Definitely it's something to keep exploring, this fascinating intersection between different ways of knowing.